Hey, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 5 demo for the piece I call Peter Venkman. So here we are. We started with Egon a couple years ago. We moved to Winston before Christmas. We did Ray a couple weeks ago, and here we are now finally getting to Peter, the fourth of the Real Ghostbusters. Now, this has been really fun to do these. When I did Egon way back when, it's just because Egon was such a crazy design, I thought it'd be fun. I kind of never thought I would revisit, and then once my kids encouraged me to do Winston, it was like, okay, well, let's just go through them all. And I still plan on doing more characters from that animated series. However, we are done with the 4 Ghostbusters. That's why I kind of want to do that little bit of a, where do we start and where are we now kind of thing. Since I have done 3 of these already, you guys know the methods, and if you don't know the methods, there's 3 others that you can look at. I may still reference them, but the main thing I wanted to talk about here was the design. So I think that the Peter Venkman from the Real Ghostbusters is a pretty good design. As I mentioned before in the Ray video, I think that Ray is the weakest. I think that Winston is probably second weakest because he just doesn't have a whole lot of very specific defining characteristics. It's kind of like Ray's are just kind of bad, Winston's are kind of just average. Then I think the next one up is Peter, because there are some things here that I think make him stand out from some of the other like background characters of the world, like this big curl in the front, and then the kind of mullety thing going on in the back, and then there's Egon, because Egon is just the best looking character of them all. So what did I try to do when I was interpreting this character? Like all of them, the main thing is I want to make sure that you look at them and you know which character it is. And I don't mean like which character in Ghostbusters, because that's pretty easy. More about just you want to have no context and go, oh hey look, he did a character from Ghostbusters. The other thing that I wanted to do with Peter was I wanted to try and bring in just a touch of Bill Murray's appearance, just a little bit. And admittedly, I didn't really do that with any of the others, but I thought it would just be kind of fun because Egon is, actually no, I was going to say that I think that he might be the one that is the furthest from what he looks like in the movie, but that would be just a wrong statement. I mean, none of them look like they do in the movie, so I think that it was really just more of an idea of let's get some of that Murray-ness in there. One of the ways that I did that was I wanted him to have the 2 eyebrows pushing up kind of expression, that thing where they're both shoving up towards the middle. That's something that Bill Murray does a lot, and technically this character also does in the cartoon occasionally, but it's not like a hallmark thing that he does like Bill Murray. Then I also just followed like a couple of other little touches here or there, like maybe the shape of the nose or something that kind of brings that together. And otherwise, I tried to honor the design from the cartoon as much as possible. That's why we're hitting the right colors and the right hairdo. And he's got sort of, all my redesigns have kind of big shapes that where I'm trying to mimic the design from like if you were to make like a checklist of the design, I'm trying to hit the checklist, but then I'm also trying to find each one of them some sort of a defined shape. And so with Egon is almost kind of like a cylinder on a neck to some degree. Winston is kind of blocky. Like his whole thing is that I wanted him to seem like he was the reliable one. I think I mentioned that when I did that video. And then Ray was largely about trying to reinvent him and make him a little pudgier, and then bring just like a little bit of that sort of trapezoidal feel to him. And then this was more about a curve that sort of goes from like in at the bottom and then flares out at the top, kind of like an ice cream cone. Just trying to get a little bit of language there. Now, if I was actually doing these for, like, let's say a reboot, we would simplify these much more. Those shapes that I just talked about would be more pronounced, potentially. It kind of depends. I mean, if I actually had a dream gig where we were going to redesign the Ghostbusters, I would love to redesign it with like a Japanese animation house that would actually have more detail put in than less. Like think if Madhouse did like a reboot or a one-shot movie or something like that of the Real Ghostbusters, which would be like absolutely berserk, but that would be a really cool thing to see, because then we could actually have a design that's closer to what we've got right here, and it would still be, you know, fully animated. That said, though, if it was like an American animation kind of reboot, especially with the way trends are going, they would probably be simplified quite a bit so that they could be a little bit more easily animated. So here we've done the rough sketch, which found our general shapes. Then we move into the tighter line so that we can bring some extra dimension and punch and some stylistic flair as well with how we're handling the line weights. From there, we're going to go into flats because we do want it to feel at least slightly animated. We're not going for truly this looks like an animated look, but we're kind of hinting at that. So we're going to do some flats and then just some simple shadow stuff. Then we end it by using a white paint so that we're trying to mimic kind of a paint pen. As I've mentioned in the previous videos, the original Egon piece was mimicking what I used to do when I would go to Sketchbomb in San Francisco, where I would use a Color-Ace pencil, a ballpoint pen, and then a white Elmer's paint pen. That's kind of how I would do all of those sketches back then. And then when I was doing the Egon one, I was like, hey, what about color? Because these characters are color is so important, especially to Egon. He's got such a crazy palette. He's got like the baby blue suit and the pink collar and the red glasses and the yellow hair. I mean, it's just all over the place. So I was like, well, I got to make sure that I get that stuff, that color in there. So that's what led to the look of these. So they've got a little bit of a sketchy feel, a little bit of a refined, not like refined, like highly refined, but just like it took more time to do these because they're just illustrations. They're not supposed to move. And then on top of that, we also want to try and speak to the animated nature of the source material. So I think I mentioned that Ray's was a little bit challenging because his suit has that tan look. His skin, being Caucasian, is kind of close to tan, and he's got that red hair, and it's on a brown paper background. Eyeballs are usually white. So Ray was really hard to get all of the values and stuff correct, so that I could make sure that they separated. Peter didn't have that problem. He's got this dark brown hair. He's got mostly dark brown eyes. I mean, in the show he's got like dots for eyes, but I just kind of riffed and made them brown. He's got a darker brown suit than Ray does, and then he's got this like turquoise collar, so we're not having to sort of balance 5 different browns basically when it comes to Peter. There is a lot of brown in here, but their values are like so different that it's much easier to deal with. I also added this 5 o'clock shadow. If you'll remember in the Ray one, I wanted to do that, but it just didn't fit his character. Peter, it fit. It also fit because of, well, one is I think it fits his character just as a vibe. It's kind of funny to think that like 5 o'clock shadow feels like a character trait, but it really is. And then on top of that, you know, Bill Murray always kind of has that, so it's bringing a little bit of that in. So we're starting first with that cooler shadow, cooler in temperature, and then we'll use the warmer shadow as a bit of a support shadow. I was actually thinking before I started recording this if I've been explaining those two shadows correctly in the more recent Ghostbusters videos, and I don't really think that I have, because I don't really even have a system around it. I think that's the big problem. When I did the Egon one, I put in the cool shadow first, and then I was like, oh man, I feel like I need something to hint at like another level of shadow here, and I started using the softer one. And then when I was moving on to Winston and Ray and now Peter, it was like, oh, I should do that for these as well because it's the same thing, but then like I wasn't necessarily implementing it exactly the same. So the logic, I guess you could say, behind this is there's the cooler shadow, which we're using as our main shadow, and then there's the warmer shadow, which we're just using to supplement and where we need to show extra definition, a lighter bit of shadow, maybe round off like an edge, like how we're selling that forehead plane and the brow of the nose, or not the bridge of the nose, that's what it's called. We're selling that a little bit more, and that's really the main point of it. But beyond that, I'm not. I think when I did the Egon one, there was a little bit more of like, I need this for this reason, and so I employed it in a very specific way. And in this, it was more just like, yeah, sure, I'll use this to help, and then kind of, you know, do what feels right kind of thing. And now we do the rim light, which this, I actually kind of simplified the rim light. I think it was on the Winston one. It kind of got a little out of control. I was trying to balance like a normal white layer as well as an overlay white layer, and it just got to be a little bit much. On this one, I just went simpler. I just used white and lowered the opacity on it so that it wasn't too saturated and it didn't pop too much. I don't know, it lacked a little bit of effortlessness, a little bit of simplicity before. So now we're just quickly throwing in the outline done with the faking of the Elmer's paint pen, and then we duplicate it and make it black and then scoot it a little bit so that it looks like it has a drop shadow, like it has dimension to it. And this right here is the final piece. I just want to take a second to zoom in here so that you can see that drop shadow. You can see how much dimension it actually adds to it when it's at a higher resolution. When you're seeing it kind of small on Instagram or something like that, it's just not as clear. And I think when you view it at real size, it adds something to it. So again, this right here is the final piece. I'm super stoked that we got to get the 4 main cast members of the Real Ghostbusters done. As I said, I didn't really think I was ever going to visit the other characters, so I'm glad I did. We've got more that we're going to do, so you'll just have to wait and see exactly who we get to. So, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video or any of the others, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.